welcome to this edition of Keep It Simple. We're going to be flying the Justflight DC-8, and as the title suggests, this is going to be a short, simple, and sweet tutorial on how to get her up in the air, not necessarily using the standard operating procedures, but yeah, just to get you up in the air. For starters, what we want to do is to load up the flight at your gate and make sure the plane is in a complete cold and dark state. And by doing that, basically, the only things you really need to do is when the plane starts, you're going to turn off the fuel flow by switching these 4 switches to the down position, which they're already in. And then you want to go over to the overhead and you want to turn off all 4 of these generators. Make sure they're in this position here, as well as your bus transfer switches right here. And you want to take your battery switch and put it in the middle position right there. Moving on, you want to go to the fuel panel for the aircraft, and we do that by going right here, fuel and payload. Now, with this aircraft, there are 4 engines on it, and each engine feeds off of a main tank. The descriptions of the fuel tanks that you see right here within P3D are not correct. Very important. This is where a lot of people get hung up. Starters, we're just going to zero out all these tanks just to make it easier on us. Like so. There's a lot of tanks on here, but only 4 of them really matter. The rest are all auxiliary tanks. And the 4 that really matter are the top 2. This is tank number 1. I'm going to put that at 60%. Tank 2. This is for engine 2. I'm going to put that also at 60% for our flight. And then bottom 2, external 1 and external 2. This is what the main tank that feeds engine 3. I'm going to put that 60%. And then the bottom one feeds engine 4. Main tanks, they are not labeled correctly right here. We're not going to worry about the weights here, because the goal of this tutorial is just to get you up in the air and get started. Now, while you're at the gate, you can either use the jetway and open your door by pressing Shift E, or you can go to your overhead, and if you're not at a jetway, you can press Shift E to open the door and push these 3 buttons here. And by doing that, press the Shift E here to open the door. That it places some ground equipment outside the aircraft there, and puts those stairs there. Jeep ground power unit out there as well. And while we're at it, we need to have our parking brake set. Should have been done earlier. Right here is a switch on the DC-8, and when you switch that, the yokes go away. That way we can better see what exactly we are doing. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do now that we're in a cold and dark state is go to the battery switch. Right here, we're going to switch that to external power. Now we're going to turn generators 1 and 3 on. That's what's needed to start the engines initially. Next thing we're going to do is turn our bus power switches on. Like so. Come up here, turn the flight recorder on. That. We're going to turn our galley power on, which is right below the flight recorder system right here. On and auto. So the next thing we want to do is zoom in on the fuel panel here, which is just below the engineer's system here, and make sure we got sufficient fuel for the flight. And you want to pay close attention to this. We have this lever right here is to control the fuel flow for engine 1. Here's engine 2, here's engine 3, and here's engine 4. And if you follow those lines from those, you can see the main tanks. Build them correctly, they should have fuel in them. So for engine 1, we follow the line from there, and it goes right to here, and we got 60%. And that one right there, so that's good. Engine 2, we're following the main line to this one right here. It's not right there. But center, we don't have anything in the center tanks. It's engine 3. The main line is coming from there. Engine 4, find the main feed line right here. Should be 0. So that. Now proceeding onto the left side of the engineer's panel, we're going to go ahead and move the 4 cabin compressor switches to the on position, and those are located right here. Oops. That. So we're going to switch those on, all 4 of those on. You'll see a rise in the cabin compressor switches. On the real aircraft, you'd hear those actually starting, but it's not modeled in this aircraft. Next, we're going to go up to the recirculation fans, which is right above here. Right there. We're going to turn all of those on. And we're going to turn on the Freon compressors, which are right here. Next step is to turn on the pitot heat, and that's going to be on the overhead right here. Verify that you got amperage rising there on the pitot amps there. That shows you got power going. Now we're going to, just for the sake of realism, turn on the no smoking signs and fasten seatbelts. The next thing we're going to do is set up the autopilot a little bit. And we're going to start right here by setting our altitude alarm. For me, if I'm not using ATC, I just set it for 18,000, which is transition altitude. That way it'll remind me to reset my altimeter. If you have ATC, this would be the first altitude restriction that ATC gives you. We then go down to the throttle quadrant, and we set our headings and altitudes and speeds and vertical speeds, all that right here. We're going to climb. We're just going to do some pattern work here at Williams Gateway Airport. So I'm going to do an altitude of 5,000 feet. At 5,000 right there. And then the vertical speed is in right here, and you're going to that by switching this up here. 1,500 there. Now, contrary to what the manual says in the Justflight documentation, they have you moving these all around to get the engine started. That is not correct. Again, the correct way to get this started is leaving them all in the up position here, and that's also how you would do it in the real world, and I've never had any issue with it being this way. So this is the way it should look, and that's the way the aircraft should load, and you should have no problems starting the engines that way. Let's move on to starting the engines. So we're over at the overhead panel here, and we're going to first go to the ignition and starter position here. We're going to push that to armed. We're going to override it by pushing that down, and we'll start the number 3 engine first by pulling the plug here, and you should hear it begin to start up. We're going to look down here. We're going to watch for 20% on the N2, and it's there, so we're going to come down here and flip on the fuel, and there you go. We got a good start. Going to repeat those steps for 1 and 4. %, right here. There she goes. And you'll do the same thing for all 4 engines. Okay, once all 4 engines are started, we're going to go and turn on the generators right here. We had 1 and 3 on. We're going to turn on 2, 4. Turn the anti-skid on, which is on the main panel right over here. Just like so. And we're going to turn our taxi lights on. Like that. And we're going to turn our nav lights on as well. Hopefully by this point you've shut your door. We should have went over that earlier. You want to go up here. If you are not at a jetway, you want to go ahead and push these buttons here to remove the air stairs and the ground service vehicles. Some people like to start the engines as you're pushing back. You know, it's your choice, whatever you'd like to do. At this point, we would go ahead and push back. All right, our pushback is complete. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and set my bugs here. You can set them to whatever you want. You just simply drag. Set this red one to my max speed. There is really no rhyme or reason to these here. It's your personal preference. V1, your rotate, and your V2 speed, which is always the same in this aircraft, it seems. And we'll go over that as soon as we get to the runway. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and taxi. Just the parking brake. Radios on this aircraft are pretty self-explanatory like every other radio, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with that. You got your nav radios here, 1 and 2. This is the standby switch, okay? And yeah, those work just like any other it does. The comm radios are right here. COM 1, COM 2, and these are your automatic direction finding radios there. This is not operable. But while we are right here, we're going to go ahead and put our flaps to 15 degrees. We're also going to make sure that our trim is set. That by pulling there. Go. Go and taxi to the runway. Okay, so here we are at the hold short point of runway 30 center at Williams Gateway Airport. To go ahead and line up the aircraft. And while we're doing that, we're going to turn our landing lights on. All right. Now, one of the things you'll notice if you've tried taking off in this aircraft before watching this tutorial is it seems like it takes forever to get off the ground, and you're exactly right. This aircraft has to be over 140 knots before you can rotate on it. Therefore, I've set my VR speed to right at about 140, and that way I'll know that that's when to lift off. Now, obviously, that's going to go up depending on how much fuel you have in the aircraft. We've only got 60% in the 4 main fuel tanks. We could put a lot more on, but unless you're doing a 5 or 6 hour flight, using just those first 4 main fuel tanks is all you're going to need. So we're going to advance the throttles up to 50%. Make sure we don't see anything funny or get any weird alarms. Takeoff thrust. Forward motion on the yoke. Our airspeed is alive. There's 80 knots. Rotate. 10 degrees. Hold it. It's positive rate. Gears coming up. Going to retract the flaps 1. It's important to note that you need a runway length of at least 10,000 feet to safely take off in this aircraft. Passing through about 165 knots, you can retract the flaps to 10. Any higher than that, we can go ahead and retract it fully. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and engage the autopilot. And by doing that, we're here. We're going to flip that sucker on right there. And you turn this knob over here to hold vertical speed, and that will hold your altitude that you have plugged into the altitude hold right here. And for the heading, we simply switch this over to the heading mode. So with this aircraft, it's important to notate that it does not have an auto throttle. The real-world aircraft did not as well. Some of the earlier versions of the Justflight model did have auto throttle included in them. The later service packs did remove it. We're going to go ahead and plug in the course for our landing runway, which is 305, and we'll do that right down here. Already did that. 5. Holding at 5,000 feet, watching our speed. What we'll want to do now is plug in our 2 ILS frequencies. Right down there, it's 11015 is what we're looking for. 11015. Go ahead and activate it. In there. So we're turning our base leg here for the runway, and we can start putting out some flaps. Localizer is active here, as is our glide slope. And just before final, make sure that your flaps are at 25 degrees. Down here and switch to the localizer mode. Once we're established, we'll turn it to the approach mode, which on this aircraft is called the glide slope mode. And there she goes. At the point we're going to do gear down. Down, and we're going to do flaps 25. Keep an eye on the speed. Our landing speed is going to be right about 135 knots. And we can go ahead and activate the glide slope part now. She is. So at this point, our flaps are down, gear is down, landing lights are on, we're fully established on the ILS glide slope. Take our speed back to about 140 knots. At about 500 feet, we'll hand fly it down. We want a touchdown speed of about 135, between 135 and 140. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hand fly her down at this point, disengage the autopilot. Plane do the flying. Touchdown right at about 135. Flare. Going a little long, but and that's how you do it. Like that. Now we go to reverse thrusts. Boilers are activated. .60 knots, manual braking. How you doing, folks? This is Chad. You can catch me on Twitch under the Flight Hops stream. And if you like what you saw, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. I'd greatly appreciate it.